Do you have a beloved hand-knit sweater that's seen better days, just like this one? In this video, I'm going to show you how I saved my Lopi sweater, what worked, what didn't work, and what I'm going to do differently next time. So grab a needle and thread and let's get started. So I started off with the worn elbows, which it takes time to repair them, but it's fairly easy because all the stitches are still there. So since I knit this sweater myself, I have the original yarn. So if you don't have the original, use something of the same weight. However, it can be a little bit easier to use something that's a bit thinner. If you have only super thin yarn, you can double it up. Another thing to consider is if you want something to add strength. A lot of darning wool has a nylon in it, and it will protect your areas that are prone to wear even more than something that's like 100% wool like the Lopi yarn. So with duplicate stitch, all you're actually doing is just following the original stitches, and then when you come to the end of a row, you sort of go back through that stitch you already did and go up a row. It's easier to show it than to explain it, but it's really not that hard, and don't worry about doing it perfectly because it doesn't have to be perfect. It helps to tension the knit over something like a darning mushroom, a darning egg, or maybe you have a small bowl or a light bulb. That way you can really open up the knit fabric and it's easier to follow the stitches. The duplicate stitch ended up working really well for the elbow because it creates a nice tight fabric, and that's necessary for an area that gets a lot of wear like the elbow. When I started on the elbow, I made my first mistake. I started sort of right in the middle of the worn area and I just wanted to dive in, but it would have been so much easier to mark the area I wanted to mend at first with the contrasting yarn. So that's what I did next. However, I should have marked a bigger area because the waist yarn was exactly where I wanted to turn, so it was constantly in the way around the edges. I even ended up sewing through the waist yarn, so I had to cut it to get it all out. To finish off the yarn tails, I weave them through a couple of stitches in the back, and then I pull apart the yarn. I do leave a little bit of a tail, but I can cut that off later after I've worn or washed the sweater and the wool has settled a little bit. The armpit is another area that gets a lot of wear, and I think the white yarn was a little bit too tight, so that over time it got slowly pulled apart and it wore out faster because of it. There's actually 2 stitches there, and I think this was a decrease, so I'll just treat them as one. While I was at it, I also did the other armpit because I could see it was also wearing out a little bit. The stitch was still there, but it's an easy fix, so I did it right away. I wove the yarn tail around the white yarn that was still there to keep those ends in place. And since it's Icelandic wool, it's so sticky, it will fell together with wear and it should stay in place. Then the cuff. This was a little bit more challenging, but I'm happy with the end result. What worked? I picked up the stitches at the bottom of the sleeve and reknit the 1x1 rib. I didn't try to match the original on the cuff, and even though it doesn't perfectly match, that's fine and it doesn't irk me. Now, what didn't work was that I was lazy and I just wanted to get started, but the needles that I grabbed were too short. The Chaugu mini needles are perfect for socks and small circumferences, but they're not suited for messy reknitting of cuffs, and it would have been better to get the right tools for the job. Longer needles would certainly be more comfortable. I picked up a stitch on the original cuff at each turning point for each row. That way I don't have to go back in and whip stitch it to the cuff. Then I also started picking up stitches along the way for extra strength, and I think that was a good call. Again, I didn't mark the area, so I ended up tapering towards the top and didn't quite cover the area that I wanted to cover. I decided to pick up a few extra stitches along the cast on edge. What I did is I bound off along the edge, creating sort of an extra barrier at the edge of the cuff. I think that really worked, but I wish I would have continued it a little bit further, because at the end I decided I would just wrap the yarn around the edge, and I think in hindsight it's not as strong as I would have liked. Next time I would just pick up more stitches and continue doing the bind off. So eventually I do think I'll have to reknit the entire cuff, but for now this works. Now, if you have a tip for maybe a technique or a YouTube video on how to protect or reinforce or mend the edge of the cuff, I would love to hear it in the comments. The mending of the cuff was a little bit hard to follow. I was really struggling with the needles that I was using. So if you want me to clarify something, please let me know. Now, the cuff might look a little bit messy and it's a little bit crooked, but I actually enjoyed doing this part. Next time I will certainly mark the area I want to mend, grab the right tools, but I definitely won't stress about it being perfectly invisible. All in all, I'm really happy I get to wear and enjoy my sweater again, and that it has a little bit more character to boot.